evolution has made crabs 5 times. Not 5 species of crabs, but 5 separate times it has turned completely different animals into crabs. Like a lobster-looking thing evolves for millions of years and boom, crab. Then a different lobster-looking thing that is totally unrelated does its own thing for millions of years and boom, also a crab. This keeps happening. Scientists call it carcinization, which is just a fancy way of saying nature won't stop making crabs. And the weirdest part, we don't exactly know why. We have guesses, sure, but the fact that evolution keeps hitting the crab button over and over suggests something about being a crab is just superior. Crab supremacy. Are they better than us? We're gonna find out. So we need to talk about what's going on here, because this whole situation is honestly pretty bizarre, and by looking into this, I am now afraid that humans might turn into crabs. So what is going on? So basically, carcinization means the process of turning into a crab, which is already kind of funny because most scientific terms describe something that happens once, maybe twice. This one describes something that keeps happening over and over, which should tell you something right there. Here's what carcinization actually looks like. You start with some kind of long-bodied creature. Maybe it looks sort of shrimp-ish, or maybe sort of lobster-ish. It's got a long body and a big tail that sticks out behind it. Then over millions of years, that body gets flatter, wider, and the tail shrinks and folds up underneath. And suddenly you've got something that looks a whole lot like a crab. Flat shell, tucked tail, and walks around on these splayed out legs. And the thing is, this isn't just happening to one group of animals. It's happening to completely separate groups throughout prehistory. That's what makes it weird, because usually when you see the same body shape evolve multiple times, it's in really different animals. You know, birds have wings, bats have wings, but nobody's confused about whether a bat is a bird. They're obviously doing different things. But with crabs, you've got animals in the same family doing this, crustaceans, and they keep landing on the exact same design. Scientists actually have specific criteria for what counts as being carcinized. Your shell has to be flatter than it is long. You need these distinct edges on the sides, and your underside has to be this broad fused plate. And your abdomen, that's your tail part, it has to fold completely under your body so you can't even see it from above. If you picture a crab, that's exactly what you're seeing. No tail hanging out, just this disc-shaped body with legs. Now, here's where this gets interesting. Not every crab is actually a crab. Yes, this has been a crabspiracy from Big Crab Government. They don't want you to know that not every crab is actually a crab. So you gotta hit the like and subscribe button right now to stay informed against the rebel crab government. See, there are true crabs, which scientists call brachyura, and then there are false crabs. And false crabs aren't false because they're lying or anything, but they're false because they evolved the crab look, but they're not in the true crab family. They're in this other group called the Anomura. So you've got hermit crabs, king crabs, porcelain crabs, all these things that look like crabs, but technically aren't. And both groups did this independently. True crabs evolved from some non-crab ancestor. False crabs evolved from some other non-crab ancestor separately, which means the crab body plan is so effective that evolution found it at least twice just between these two groups. And that's not even counting all the times it happened within each group. You can actually tell true crabs and false crabs apart pretty easily if you know what to look for. True crabs have 4 pairs of walking legs that you can see. False crabs look like they only have 3 pairs because that 4th pair is tiny or hidden somewhere, but both of them have that same general vibe. Flat, wide, hard shell, no visible tail, because it's a really clear example of something called convergent evolution. That's when different animals evolve the same solution to the same problem, except usually convergent evolution happens across really different groups. But this is all happening with crustaceans, which is much weirder, because it means there's something about that crab shape specifically that keeps working. Something about having a flat body and a tucked tail solves problems that long-bodied crustaceans run into. And look, evolution doesn't have a goal. It's not sitting over there going, let's make crabs. Or maybe it is. We should be scared. It's just random mutations, and the ones that help you survive stick around. But when you see the same thing happen 5 separate times, you start to think maybe it's not that random. Maybe there's something about the way crustacean bodies are built that makes turning into a crab kind of inevitable if you're in the right situation. Because here's the thing, these crab-shaped animals are everywhere now. Oceans, rivers, beaches, and they've been succeeding for hundreds of millions of years. So whatever advantages the crab shape gives you, they're not small. They're big enough that evolution keeps finding the shape over and over in different time periods, whether it's right now or in ancient prehistory, in different parts of the world with different starting animals. The scientist who coined the term back in 1916, his name was Lancelot Borradaile. Of course his name was Lancelot, because why not? Anyways, he described carcinization as basically taking a long-bodied crustacean and squashing it down and widening it out until it looks like a crab, which is pretty much exactly what happens. The back end shrinks, the front end spreads out, you end up with something that can scuttle around sideways and hide under rocks. So that's what's happening. Evolution keeps turning things into crabs because apparently being a crab works really well. But saying it happened multiple times doesn't quite capture how many times it has actually happened. And when I say multiple times, I mean it's honestly kind of absurd. 5 times at least. But probably more. Scientists are still arguing about the exact number, which is kind of funny because you would think how many times did this happen would be a straightforward question. But evolution doesn't exactly leave receipts, so they're working backwards from what they can see now and what they can find in fossils. The first group is true crabs, Brachycura. These are your classic crabs, the ones that showed up first in the fossil record around 200 million years ago in the Jurassic period. Somewhere back then, some long-bodied crustacean ancestor flattened out and tucked its tail under, and boom, true crab. Every single modern true crab, and there are thousands of species of these, comes from that one original shift. So that's one time. Then you've got king crabs, and king crabs are fascinating because they're enormous, right? They're the ones you see in seafood restaurants that cost a ridiculous amount of money, but they're not actually true crabs. They're false crabs, and they evolved from hermit crabs. Yes, those little guys that carry shells around. At some point, a group of hermit crabs got too big for shells, stopped using them, and their bodies hardened up and flattened out into something that looks a whole lot like a regular crab. Except here's the weird part. If you look at a king crab's anatomy, it's still asymmetrical inside. Most of their organs are lopsided because hermit crabs have asymmetrical bodies so they can coil into the spiral snail shells, and king crabs never fully lost that. So they're scuttling around looking like crabs, but internally they're still kind of hermit crabs, which is honestly pretty strange when you think about it. Third, you've got porcelain crabs. They are small, delicate, flat little things you find on rocky shores. They look like crabs, they act like crabs, but they're actually more closely related to squat lobsters than to true crabs. They show up in fossils around 150 million years ago, which means they independently became crab-shaped during the age of the dinosaurs, completely separate from true crabs. Fourth, there's this group called stone crabs, and I'm not talking about the ones that you eat. I'm talking about Lomus hirta, which is this hairy crab from the Indo-Pacific that looks so much like a true crab that people called it a stone crab. But it's not. It's another false crab, another independent evolution of the crab shape. And fifth, you've got coconut crabs. Now, coconut crabs are technically hermit crabs, but they're hermit crabs that said forget the shell. As adults, they don't use shells. They just walk around with their hard, flat bodies, climbing trees and cracking open coconuts with their claws. They can even weigh up to 9 pounds, and they're the largest land arthropod on Earth. And they're basically crabs now, even though they start life as shell-wearing hermits. They also have been known to eat humans, but let's not talk about that for too long, or else big crab government is gonna get me. So that's 5 clear cases where evolution looked at a non-crab and turned it into a crab. But there's more, because scientists have found extinct groups of crustaceans that also went crab-shaped. There were these things called Cyclidia in the Triassic and Jurassic periods that looked strikingly crabbish, even though they weren't even in the same lineage as modern crabs. And within the groups I just mentioned, there are subgroups that might count as separate instances too. Some researchers think true crabs might have evolved the crab shape twice within their own family tree. Some think there are more false crab evolutions we haven't fully documented yet. The fossil record isn't complete, and genetic data is still being analyzed. And every few years, someone finds a new weird crab fossil that changes the count. But the point is, evolution has run this experiment at least 5 times that we're sure about. 5 separate lineages of crustaceans, starting from different ancestors, ending up with the same general body plan. Flat shell, tucked tail, side-walking legs, and these didn't happen all at once. They happened spread over hundreds of millions of years, which means this isn't some fluke or one-time accident. This is a pattern. Nature keeps making crabs because something about about being a crab means you get to live longer. So when did exactly all of this start? Well, way earlier than you would think. The first real crabs show up around 200 million years ago in the early Jurassic period. Dinosaurs are just starting to become a thing on land, and down in the ocean, something's busy flattening itself out and tucking its tail under, just quietly becoming a crab while the rest of the world is focused on giant reptiles. For a while, not much happens. Crabs exist, they're doing their crab thing, but they're not exactly taking over. Then you hit the late Jurassic about 150 million years ago, and suddenly crabs are everywhere, specifically in reef environments. Coral reefs are expanding, and there are all these little cracks and hiding spots, and crabs just explode in diversity. Scientists call this the first big crab radiation, which sounds dramatic, but it really just means a bunch of new crab species showed up at once. But the Cretaceous period is really when things start to get genuinely wild. This is 145 to 66 million years ago, and paleontologists actually call this the Cretaceous Crab Revolution, which is a great name for a band, but it is also an accurate description of what happened. Something like 80% of modern crab families originated during this time. Most of the crabs you see today can trace their family tree back to the Cretaceous. This is also when crabs started developing their really nasty traits. Strong claws that could crush shells. Some of them became specialized predators that would hunt down snails and clams and just crack them open. There's this fossil crab called Megaxantho, and it had these toothy ridges on its claws specifically for breaking shells. So crabs weren't just scuttling around anymore. They were actively hunting things and doing it pretty well. And then crabs started leaving the ocean, which seems ambitious for an animal that breathes through gills, but they made it work. They moved into fresh water, and some of them started hanging out on beaches. A few really bold ones went into the forests, and we know this because in 2021, scientists found a crab preserved in amber. Yes, amber, which is fossilized tree resin. You find mosquitoes in amber. You find ants in amber. You don't find crabs in amber because crabs don't hang out in trees. Except apparently 100 billion years ago, they did, which is a thought that should terrify you. This tree crab is called Cretaceous anthata. Do not clock me on that name. I don't know how to say it. And it is tiny, but the fact that it exists at all means crabs were exploring land way earlier than anyone thought. We're talking 50 million years earlier than the previous estimate. So while T-Rex is still tens of millions of years away from even existing, crabs are already climbing around in forests getting stuck in tree sap. Now, my favorite prehistoric crab is this thing called Callichimaria perplexa. And perplexa is right because this crab is genuinely perplexing. It's 95 million years old, and when scientists found it, they didn't know what to do with it because it doesn't look like a crab. It's got these huge eyes with no sockets, paddle-shaped legs for swimming, and a long tail that sticks out behind it, which is one of the things crabs specifically don't have. Tell me this thing does not look like Paris the Pokemon, like without the mushrooms. It's like a 1-to-1, I feel like. Scientists actually called it the strangest crab that ever lived. Its name means perplexing beautiful chimera, which is a very fancy way of saying we have no idea what the f we're looking at, because Callichimaria kept a bunch of features that you normally see only in baby crabs. It's like it just never grew up, and it was only the size of a quarter, and it swam around in open water, which is not standard crab behavior at all. What this tells us is that the Cretaceous wasn't just crabs perfecting the crab shape. It was crabs trying out every possible variation. Some worked, some didn't, but they were experimenting. And then the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, and crabs just kept going. They didn't even slow down. Fast forward to today, and you've got crabs that are genuinely absurd. The Japanese spider crab has legs that span 13 feet. 13 feet. It is the largest arthropod on the planet, and it is just a crab that decided to get really, really big. It lives in deep water near Japan and can live for 100 years, which is a long time to be a spider crab. On the opposite end, you've got pea crabs that are the size of, well, who could have guessed? A carrot. No, it's a pea. They're the size of a pea. They're a few millimeters across. They live inside oysters and mussels and just steal food from their hosts. Their bodies are soft because they don't need armor when they're living inside someone else's shell. So you've got the full range. Giant crabs, tiny crabs, and everything in between. Then there's the coconut crab, which I mentioned earlier, which is 9 pounds, lives on land, and climbs trees, and has claws strong enough to crack open coconuts, and also strong enough to hurt you pretty badly if you bother it. There are stories of coconut crabs stealing camping gear, which is both impressive and deeply annoying if you're the camper. And in 2005, scientists found the Yeti crab, deep sea covered in hair. Actually, it's bristles, but they look like hair, so everyone calls it the Yeti crab. And it doesn't eat the hair. It eats the bacteria that grows on the hair. It's farming bacteria on its own arms, which is a weird way to make a living, but it works. The range of crabs today is honestly kind of ridiculous. Mountain streams, deep ocean trenches, coral reefs, beaches, rainforests, your local motel. Some are carnivores, some are filter feeders, some are herbivores. They've figured out how to survive basically everywhere, which brings us back to the question we started with. What is it about being a crab that makes this possible? Scientists don't actually know for sure. And I know that's a disappointing answer, but it's the honest one. They have theories, good theories, but nobody's proven exactly which one is right, or if it's all of them at once. The first theory is protection. Crabs have a thick shell on top, and their tail is folded underneath the shell, so there's no soft exposed belly for a predator to bite. Compare that to a lobster where the entire tail is just hanging out in the open. It makes for an easy target. Crabs fix that problem by tucking everything away. You're basically a rock with legs. You're pretty hard to eat. The second theory is stability. Crabs are wide, flat, and low to the ground. You can wedge yourself into a crack in a reef and just stay there. Predators cannot flip you over, can't pull you out, and you're firmly planted. And if you need to move, you're not going to tip over because your center of gravity is basically on the floor. The third theory is the sideways thing. Most crabs walk sideways. There's actually a reason for that. If a predator comes at you, you can dart left or right without having to turn your whole body around. Your eyes stay pointed at the threat while you're escaping, which is genuinely smart if you think about it. Most animals have to turn and run, which means they're not looking at the danger anymore. Crabs don't have that problem. And the fourth theory, and this one's interesting, is that the crab body plan is versatile. Once you get rid of that big tail, your legs can evolve to basically do anything. Some crabs have paddle legs for swimming. Some have digging legs for burrowing. Some have thick walking legs for land. The crab shape is a base model that you can modify. And evolution loves things that it can modify because that means you can adapt to new environments without starting from scratch. There's a researcher named Javier Luque who studies crabs. Yes, he's the crabs guy. And he pointed out that having a big lobster tail actually limits what the rest of your body can do. You're hauling this huge tail around, so that constrains your options. Get rid of the tail and suddenly you've got room to try new things. The fifth theory is hiding. A flat body fits under rocks. It fits in coral. Fits in places where a long-bodied animal can't go. And if predators can't reach you, you don't get eaten. Simple. But here's the thing that nobody wants to admit. These are all guesses. Educated guesses, sure, but still guesses. Because the real answer is probably some combination of all these things, and it probably varies depending on which group of crabs we're talking about. Maybe one group became crabs because of predator pressure. Maybe another group became crabs because it let them invade new habitats. Evolution doesn't follow a script. It just does what works in the moment. Or, and what the elite won't tell you, is that it's big crab lobbying the government to make more crabs. They don't want this leaked, but I have to tell people. There's also this idea that maybe being a crab isn't the advantage by itself. Maybe it's what being a crab allows you to do next. You become a crab, and now you can evolve better claws, or faster legs, or whatever. The crab shape opens doors. It's not the end goal, it's just a really useful starting point for other changes. What we do know is that when something evolves 5 separate times, there's a reason. Natural selection doesn't keep picking the same option unless that option is working. And crabs are everywhere. They're in every ocean, every kind of habitat, and they're thriving. So whatever the crab shape is doing for them, it's enough. But scientists are still studying this. They're looking at crab DNA to find patterns. They're comparing carcinized crabs to their non-crab relatives to see what's different, testing whether crab-shaped animals actually survive predators better or reproduce more or whatever. The research is ongoing, and every few years someone finds a new fossil that changes part of the story. So the answer to why does this keep happening is we don't know yet, but we're working on it. In the meantime, evolution's probably busy making another crab somewhere. But now I should mention that evolution doesn't just turn things into crabs. Sometimes it does the opposite. There's actually a term for when crabs stop being crabs: decarcinization, which is exactly what it sounds like. A crab-shaped animal evolves back into something that's not crab-shaped. And this has happened at least 7 times that scientists know about. Take frog crabs. These are true crabs, proper members of the Brachyura family, but they've gone and made themselves longer and narrower again. They burrow into sand on the ocean floor, apparently being flat and wide wasn't working for that. So over time, they stretched back out. Their shells got longer and their tails unfolded a bit. They're still crabs technically, but they're crabs that decide to undo some of the crabness. Mole crabs did something similar. These are the little guys you find on beaches that burrow backwards into the sand right when the waves wash up. And they basically turned themselves into torpedoes. Smooth, streamlined, barely any legs, no big claws. They don't look like crabs at all. They look like someone tried to design the least crab thing possible while still technically being a crab. And it works for them because they need to dig fast and filter feed in the surf. But the really interesting case is the whole hermit crab situation. Hermit crabs originally gave up being crabs so that they could live in shells. They let their abdomens stay soft and coiled so they could fit into snail shells. That's decarcinization. Then later, king crabs evolved from hermit crabs and went back to being crab-shaped. That's recarcinization, I guess. So you've got crabs that become not crabs, that became crabs again. It's always crabs. It's crabs all the way down. And you could still see the evidence of this in king crab anatomy, because as I mentioned, their insides are asymmetrical, their reproductive organs are lopsided, because their ancestors spent millions of years twisted up inside spiral shells. And king crabs never fully corrected that. They're wearing the evolutionary history of their hermit crab phase on the inside. So why would any animal stop being a crab if being a crab is so great? Well, it turns out being a crab is great for a lot of things, but not everything. If a crab runs into its natural predator, a cooking pot, it's gonna die. That's a case where you would not want to be a crab. If you're trying to burrow straight down into sand really fast, being flat and wide is actually bad. You want to be narrow and streamlined. If you're carrying around a borrowed shell for protection, you don't need a thick hard shell of your own. You can save the energy and just stay soft. Evolution doesn't care about being consistent. It just does whatever helps you survive right now. If being a crab helps, great. If unbeing a crab helps, also great. Neither one is permanent. Meanwhile, scientists are still trying to map out the full crab family tree, and they're running into problems because about half of the branches are basically unknown. They don't have genetic data for a lot of groups, fossils are incomplete, and every time someone digs up a new prehistoric crab, it changes part of the picture. In 2021, a team of researchers published this big analysis trying to nail down exactly how many times carcinization happened and when. They're using DNA sequencing now, trying to find genetic patterns that show up every time something becomes a crab. Because if there are specific genes that get turned on or off during carcinization, that would explain why it keeps happening. Maybe it's just an easy switch for crustacean bodies to flip. People always ask if everything is eventually going to become a crab. And the answer is sadly, no. Don't worry, you're not gonna wake up a crab as much as I would like you to. This only happens to crustaceans because their bodies are built in a modular way. They've got segments that they can arrange. Humans don't have that. Neither do most animals. You can't turn a mammal into a crab. The body plan doesn't work that way. Well, not yet, that is. But within crustaceans, yeah, we'll probably see more carcinization in the future. Because if it keeps working, there's no reason to think evolution is done making crabs. Give it another 50 million years, and some shrimp lineage that hasn't tried it yet probably will. Right now, there are thousands of crab species all over the planet. Deep ocean vents where the water is boiling hot. Antarctic waters where everything is frozen. Coral reefs, rivers, forests, deserts. Somehow, some crabs can hold their breath and climb trees. Some crabs live their entire lives in pitch black caves. Some crabs are transparent. There are crabs that have symbiotic relationships with sea anemones that carry them around in their claws for protection. I actually own some in my fish tank behind me. They're really cute, but they tried to pinch me once. One species of crab, and I'm not making this up, farms algae gardens on its back. It plants algae in its shell and tends to it and then eats it later. That is agriculture. Yes, crabs invented farming. It's not advanced farming, but still. Humans didn't invent that, crabs did. The crabs are rising up, they are learning. The range of what crabs can do is genuinely impressive when you lay it all out. And that's probably the real answer to why carcinization keeps happening. The crab body plan is a Swiss Army knife. It works in enough different situations that evolution keeps coming back to it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's good enough for most things and flexible enough to be tweaked for specific things. Scientists are going to keep studying this. They're going to find more fossils, sequence more DNA, and run more comparisons between crab-shaped and non-crab-shaped crustaceans. Eventually, we'll have a more complete answer, but for now, we've got a pretty good idea of what's happening, even if we don't know every detail of why. So in the end, are humans turning into crabs? Not yet, that is. But hey, maybe in 100 million years, they can come back to this video and say, damn, look at this dummy. He thought we weren't going to be crabs, but meanwhile, it was always crabs. It was crabs all along. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and comment down below what your favorite part was, and if you would like to learn any other topics that relate to prehistory. If you don't want to miss any of our future uploads, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the hype button to make sure this video gets seen by more people. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, you can click the video on screen now.